Hello again. So in this part two, I just want to show you how we're gonna retrieve the data and able to update the data in the database. So let's get started. So the first thing, we're gonna use a repository pattern. So let's get started. So the first thing that I'm gonna do, I'm gonna add a new folder. I'm gonna call it interface. Okay, I already have it. So in this interface, I'm gonna add a new class. I'll call it phone book. In fact, before we do that, in the interface, let's add a new folder. I'm gonna call it repositories. Let's say repositories. No, the spelling is wrong. Let me see. Repository. And then the other one I can just call it. Yeah, in fact, let's start adding our interfaces. So I'll call it new class. I'll call it phone book. It's an interface. So we're gonna call it as a public interface. And then, so before we add these interfaces, let's start by adding our base interfaces that are gonna do all our Crud operation. So let me add a new class. I'm gonna call it iRepository. So in this iRepository, we're gonna in fact it's an interface. So we're gonna let's add an entity where the entity is a type of a class. So you can see we're doing generatics. So let's first define our first method. So creating generatics so that you can able to enter any type of a class in our method, so we won't be able to repeat ourselves. So the first one, and let me see, is called get by ID. So I'm gonna need an ID. So the second one, the task again for generic class. So let's say get by ID again, but this one is gonna require a string type of an ID. So other one, let's say task again, a generic class. Let's say call it just list all, and then again a task of a T entity. Let's call it add. So it is gonna again require entity. Let's say entity entity. Again, we're gonna have the task of entity. Let's create update, which is good. Also need a T entity, which is an entity. And the last one, I'll just say task delete. So it's gonna need an int ID. Let me just fix my spelling for my entity. So remove T2. How do you write entity? Entity, okay. Let's remove. So you can see here we just create a generic class that we're gonna use it in our entities. So in this class, what we're gonna do, we're just gonna inherit our I repository so that we can able to use those methods that we just defined now. So this class is going to inherit I repository, and then it's going to use phone book. So if you can see there, because we created generic, so we can able to use any type of a class so that we can reuse it in every class rather than to repeat ourselves. So the first task method that we're going to define is a type of a task which is going to just return the identity that is added. So I'm going to call it as add phone book. Phone book, which is going to require phone book, and then the next one is a task which is going to return a list of our phone book. So I'm going to use I enumerables for phone book, and then I'm going to call it get phone book, and then I also have a task of an int, or we call it delete phone book, which again is gonna require an ID, and then we're gonna also have a task of an int, which is gonna do it update phone book. Okay, so we're gonna need a phone book. entity. So that's it. This is all we need for this phone book. So I'm just gonna copy this. Gonna just update the names. So I'm gonna add a new interface. I'm gonna call it I entry. So this interface, don't forget to make it public. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just change this to entry. And it's also entry. Just update everything there. So the first one, I'll say add entry. So this one will be entry. I'll say that entry. Delete entry. Upgrade entry. So you can see it's almost the same thing. Just here we're adding the entry, updating the entry, as well deleting the entry. So save this one. So now let's do the implementation of these interfaces. So I'm gonna add a new folder. I will call it repository. Repositories. So what you're gonna do here, you're just going to add our repositories. So the first thing that we're gonna do, we're gonna add a new class, which I'm gonna call it EF repository, and then in this class there's gonna be an abstract class. Abstract. Also gonna also use generate and inherit repository. And then of a key where key is the top of a class. So now we're gonna implement our I repository that we defined earlier. So let's start it. So the first thing is to define our properties that we're gonna use. So we're gonna start with our app context that we created earlier in part one. So I'll just copy our context name, which is a phone book DB context. So we call it underscore phone book context. Then Again, we're gonna have our protected constructor, which we're gonna inject our DB context. So just name it like that. So we do dependency injection for this DB context. So yeah, so let's define our first. It's just an add. So it's just gonna do a phone book. We do a set to the class, which is a general class, dot add. We add our entity, and then we make this method a sync. So we're gonna await our add and save changes, sync, and then we return our entity. So you can see the set is not defined because we didn't add our entity framework. So we're gonna just edit in our user. Yeah, so we add our using. Yeah, then let's go to the next method, which is our delete. So the delete, we're just gonna use remove, and then we pass an ID. Again, let's make this async. Await that. Sorry guys. Done that, and then await. So let me just copy this to save time typing, and just copy that. Because we must save the changes every time we do the database changes, because if you don't do the save changes, it won't update your database. So let's continue to our next method. We just get the ID again because it's a test. Let's use async, and then what we're gonna do, we are going to search our entity, which is going to do a set of T, and then we get or find async. So we're using an ID. So we just returning this guy. So we're going to do a return await that. So this one is almost the same, just we're searching by a string instead of an integer. So we're gonna do the same, just copy the first one and then gonna tell our string. So async. So go to the next one. We're gonna list all our entities. So let's just change this. So again, it's an async. So do again, but instead of find, we are getting all our entities. So we're just gonna take everything to list async. So what is complaining? Let's see. Let's figure out why it's giving an error. Okay, so you can see I made a mistake here. So it must be a list. Because we are returning a list of our entity. So let's go and modify our I repository. So we're getting a list of this entity. So let's do the last one, which is our update. So in our update, because we have to do let's do a set. We'll set our entity. And then in fact we can do that. So first of all, let's just get a state of our entity. So we're gonna do thing of a two, of a two dot we check an update. This is an entity. Again, we're gonna save async. So this one, gonna await it, and then again async. So yeah, this is how we define our method. So let's not forget to return back our entity. So I can see this remove. Let me just change it. We must first know which entity what we are setting. So we're gonna do dot set setting dot remove. We have to remove an entity. So what I'm gonna do, let me go and modify this method. It's gonna be T of entity. So what we're gonna do here, let me go and modify my repository because we can't use an ID, so we're gonna use this ID to be able to search and able now when you get the entity, and then you can send the entity to remove the entity in the database. So yeah, so this is our class that we're gonna do everything. So we're gonna go and inherit this class so that we can able to do all this operation and able to do our Crud method. So yeah, now we can create our we can implement our interfaces. So I'm gonna create a new class. I'm gonna call it phone book repository. So in this class, we're going to inherit this class that do all the code operation. I'm gonna inherit our repository and also the EF repository, which done all our Crud operation. So this repo, so we are doing a phone book, so we're gonna pass our class, which is a phone book. Yeah, so now what we can do, we can let's put a semicolon here. We're gonna add, if it's the wrong one, so this phone repository, which we're gonna implement our interfaces. So you can see all the definition that we define in our interfaces are there. So now we're just going to define them. So the first thing, let's just create a constructor for this method. We're gonna have that phone book and this constructor. We're gonna do a injection for our DB context. So let me just copy our DB context from here. That's our DB context. That's our DB context. So it's going to be a base of our phone book DB context. So now we can able to use our DB context in our method. So let's start with an add. So in our add, we're gonna use the abstract method that we defined earlier. So I'm just gonna await add. Sorry. My keyboard's gonna think phone book. So again, this is an async because we are doing an await. Then we can return our ID. So it's gonna be phone book dot ID. Again, for delete, in our delete first thing, we're gonna get our entity using the ID. So I'm gonna just say define identity equals to await get an ID, and then we pass an ID. So again, because we're using await, we must define an async, and then when we get our entities, we can able to remove our entity. So we're gonna go just call it delete, and then we pass our entity, and then again we're gonna return an ID that was deleted. So they can just pass the ID that we pass, or we can get it from entity dot ID. So anyway, it's gonna work the same thing. So on return on, again it's an async, just return await list all, and then in update it's the same thing. First of all, the update, we need to get an ID first, and then when we get an ID, we can able to send it and able to do our we're gonna so that we can update our entity. But for now, let's just update our entity. So I'll just say await it's an async date, we'll pass our phone back. So we're gonna again return our phone book ID. So that's it. So that's how we're able to create our Crud. So if you can see how generic works, so it's very powerful thing to use. You can reuse your code everywhere, and then you don't have to repeat yourself in your code. So let me add a new class. So I'm gonna call it entry repository. So again, this repository is the same as our phone book. So I'm just going to copy our interfaces so that we can be able to inherit them. You can see I've inherited my abstract class and also the iEntry. iEntry, let me double check. Okay, I'll just call it iEntry. So we have our iEntry there, so I'm gonna use entry. So yeah, we inherit, so we also implement our method. So we're gonna do the same thing. Let me just copy and paste. Do our constructor. Is the define our constructor. Do dependency injection, so that we can able to use our DB context. So it's going to be the same thing that we've done before. Just do an add entry. Just wait. You do that. So async. Gonna return entry dot ID. Let's see why it's complaining about what. Why is complaining? So yeah, so the same thing. Just do an add some entry, return an ID. So we're gonna do the same with the delete. Same async, and then our async. Let's get our entity. Is equals to get the ID, person ID. So this method we must await. Once we get our entity, we can delete the entity, and then we can return the entity .id. That's it. So you can see just repeating what we did in the phone book. So to get this one, everything is in async. So just return the list all. So I'm going to await. We're going to do an update. So I'm going to await. So async await update and entity, and then we'll return entity dot ID. So that's how you do it. So I'm going to create another video and able to create the services and also show you how to do a dependency injection and able to call all these methods. Just see you next time. Cheers, bye.